takeaway I have from what you mentioned as that what you've observed over the last decade in India is that, and which is very true and very heartening for all of us who are taking this program, is that ESG has moved from some person sitting in one corner room doing sustainability, environment, or someone doing CSR program, going and spending X percentage of profit, to now becoming a board and a CEO level discussion. And that's very heartening, because if corporate India, whether we like it or not, is a little top-down driven. And if it happens at the top, I think we are in for a better future for all of us. So let's move back to Priyanka now and touch a topic which is a little fun topic kind of thing. So with everything good that you try to do, there's always this human aspect of greed and cutting corners. And that leads us to this topic which is quite prevalent and discussed in terms of ESG, in terms of greenwashing. So, practicing ESG and going green gives you many opportunities in terms of tax breaks, better access to finance, cheaper debt, etc. So there is temptation to, or maybe, cut corners and do stuff around greenwashing. So let's ask Priyanka, as a analyst, SEBI contributor kind of thing, what are her views on what's happening around greenwashing, and what are the temptations, why do people do it? And then as an analyst, how do you ensure that you look beyond that wash kind of thing and come down to the bare bones?
Sure. It's actually very interesting because there are multiple perspectives to it. One of the things that as an investor we have observed is that at times there's no intent to greenwash. There's just not enough strength in the organization to report it very wisely. Or, for example, a company is just starting their reporting journey, and at times there are misses, And then you have to, as an investor, look at the report very carefully, look at the trend lines, and then correlate to what is the narrative. Because sometimes the narratives are wonderfully worded. And when you read those narratives, you say, oh my God, this company is going to change the world in the next 10 years. But when you look at the data, the trend lines supporting, that narrative, it just doesn't come out. Or if you ask them about the trajectory that they're going to follow, it just doesn't correlate. So sometimes it can be intentional, but at times for smaller organizations, we see that since they are just starting out, sometimes there is some misrepresentation because there is no strength inherent, and some consultant sitting in a room has made that report for them, and the data capture has happened by the internal professionals, and there is no correlation. One very interesting example, I'll refrain from taking the name of a company, but this is a cement company, very big company, and they've been doing sustainability reporting for ages now. But if you see, they have a captive power plant, and in the footnotes of the report, they say that our scope 1, scope 2 emissions, carbon emissions, the thermal power plant is not part of the boundary. Now imagine you are reporting your carbon emissions and you are leaving out the most important part from your boundary of reporting. So it is upon the reader also to look at those footnotes, to look at those things which appear to be too rosy and too good to be true, to actually have a dialogue with the company to understand where are you coming from. And I think that requires a lot of experience and expertise, because generally it's very difficult for investors to make an investment decision just based on the report that we are reading. Again, from an investor perspective also, there is a big risk of greenwashing. And we've seen this happening in the last few months. A lot of international investors, whether it's Deutsche Bank's asset management arm, Goldman Sachs, various big organizations being, there were allegations around greenwashing. So we at SBI Mutual Fund are very wary of making any claim which we cannot substantiate. And where it comes from is that you have ESG integration in your systems, but there is a little less understanding, as Ashish was mentioning, about what is ESG. And most investors think that you've taken ESG ratings from a supplier, and the rating says that XYZ companies are good, and you are only putting those companies in your portfolio. Or you have an exclusion-based methodology, you are removing alcohol, tobacco, businesses from your portfolio, and that's ESG. Now that is not exactly ESG in its holistic form. That's only one strategy, right? So there is a gap in understanding that, and there is a gap in reporting also. So ESG funds have now been mandatorily asked by regulators and associations like AMFI to report on which strategy are they using, to report which rating agency are they using. If they are going to change the rating agency, you should not be going rating shopping every month. That on this framework, my portfolio looks very good because the methodology is different, so I'll use this one this month, and the next after 2 months, somebody else comes out with a rating which is better suited to my portfolio, and I'm using that one. So to avoid that, even the regulator has woken up to that effect, and they're saying that you have to publicly put out with a board approval, with a trustee certificate, that you have changed your rating provider because of XYZ reason. There is a lot of scrutiny now. So even we are scared of making any kind of overclaim on greenwashing because it is very easy. Even if you don't intend to do it, the understanding of ESG is very different in various sections of the society. So somebody would just ring us up and they will ask us, why is an oil and gas company in your portfolio? Well, we've not excluded oil and gas from our portfolio. No, but that's highly polluting. Why? How can you have an oil and gas company? And then we have to go back to the exclusion list. We have to go back to the rating and tell them that, look, this is how the fund is designed. But is that coming out effectively from my fund's disclosure? Now it is after the regulation. So greenwashing can happen both on the corporate side as well as the investor side. Could be intentional, could be, just by chance it has happened. What is important is that there should be assurance, which is another important part of the ecosystem which is currently developing in India. These ESG disclosures, whether on the corporate side or on the investor side, need to be assured by a third party, and some kind of audit happens. When some kind of audit happens, then the reader or the user of that information, the consumer of that information, can be sure that, okay, whatever they are mentioning, at least, it has been looked at by some third party independent body and some kind of assurance has been put on it, so we can believe these numbers. It becomes very important for investors when we are looking at sustainability data and making investment decisions, and this is not our money, this is the unit holders' money, so we have all the more responsibility. We have had 16-year, 17-year-old kids coming up to our salespeople and telling them, look, we want our money to move into socially responsible companies. The Gen Z, they are very, very conscious, and they are millennials, and Gen Z is going to be our biggest customer. We believe that because we've been getting those kind of queries. We cannot use their money in companies which have been greenwashing. So it's a huge risk for financial ecosystems, and we have to be very vigilant for greenwashing.
Interesting times coming around greenwashing, and as I think two takeaways from your talk on this, Priyanka. One is there's a lot of gray in green also, so you can't really say things are black and white and there was intent or non-intent and things like that. And more importantly, as ESG practitioners, students, the key word is boundaries. So, all of the disclosures, whether it's the GRI, SASB, etc., are all voluntary at this point in time. And one of the first things they allow you to do is to choose your boundaries. So to her point, I have worked with a client who in the past has got nothing major in terms of scope 1, but they took a boundary which said we exclude everything beyond scope 1. And their main thing was around all scope 2 and then maybe even scope 3. So how you choose your boundaries and how you read those reports becomes extremely critical kind of thing. So let's keep moving. Tejashri, so your last comments on seeing environment, India perspective, working with a large, good, respectable industrial house, but moving away from a Godrej to a larger corporate India industry perspective. From an India point of view, what are the top 1, 2, 3 things that you think corporate India should focus on? Is it just emissions or water, or what is it?
Well, I think I would highlight a few which are focus areas. I think one important focus area that we are moving towards as a corporate is, and again looking at a business lens, with a business lens in terms of de-risking the uncertainty from the value chain, supply chain. I think there is more and more inward movement in terms of sourcing of material, and also increased focus on resource use efficiency. And when I talk about resource use, it includes energy, water, but at the same time, I'm more talking about the raw material, which is going in as essential part of the product. And I think COVID has been, as she rightly mentioned, one of the biggest triggers for that. But if you look at with an environmental lens to this aspect, I, as corporates were maturing on this journey slowly, they are, like I mentioned, moving beyond their boundaries and looking at their supply chain or their value partners in terms of moving them to the level that they are probably there today. It all boils down to then what is your extended footprint or what is the impact of your business because of your value chain, and moving beyond scope 1 and 2. The moment you look at scope 3, one of the most essential categories under with respect to the GHG protocol, if you were to map the scope 3, comes out to be probably logistics and embodied carbon of the material that you're using in your product. The moment the focus shifts to analyzing this, and believe me, today this data is very poor currently, and I don't know globally how strong it is, but at least in India, there's a huge struggle going on in terms of how do you know that what you're deriving as a data for scope 3 under these categories is correct and how correct it is. And there are many challenges because there's just data not available from the endpoint in terms of mapping for these footprints. And I think the whole shift is going towards, understanding this data. There's a lot of effort large corporates are taking on basically analyzing. Digitization is helping this whole journey a lot in terms of data capturing, real-time data gathering, analysis, monitoring, looking at the leakages, looking at the hotspots that organizations are realizing having. And very importantly, there are a lot of things that are visible on the operations front in terms of energy impact or resource impact, and efficiencies have been driven. I think now the focus is moving towards more of an embodied ecological footprint of materials, which is invisible. And today it's, kind of a black hole. Organizations don't know what is it that they are actually using and what is the impact that used material actually had while it was being made. And moving ahead, I see the next decade being, a large focus going on to this. And how this is going to actually help is de-risking inward sourcing of material in terms of, getting it from as localized partners that you have, building more local vendor bases. It is going to have a huge impact in terms of business development. But at the same time, because you are also catering to international clients, you need to have the data robustness in terms of reporting, because the clients are demanding companies to declare or to come out with what they are actually doing while they are making the product. So it's having multi aspect impact. So that's where it is moving for large corporates, and once big corporates start moving towards it, the whole value chain starts gathering momentum on that. And like I said, the embodied carbon is one space where there is a lot of focus moving, and here it requires to create a demand for these products which are declaring to be more ecologically better in terms of, say, energy use, material use, or water use than the other existing products in the market. And transparency on data, how do you declare those kind of, so environment product declaration is something that I'm trying to arrive at. How do you declare that to your consumers? How do you make them more aware of how your product is superior in terms of all the stakeholder impacts, rather than just the quality that we talk about, is what is now corporates focusing on. And the moment you move towards the embodied footprint analysis, you start taking those responsible sourcing decisions in terms of driving responsible sourcing policies first in your organization, looking at your suppliers in terms of their performance on all environment, social and governance, in terms of from where are you sourcing, what is the kind of employed force that your suppliers are engaging in terms of creating your products, what is the place from where the raw material is getting sourced, is that place or the location having any eco-sensitiveness or any other impacts which impacting vulnerable community. And that's where the whole responsible sourcing bit goes. It's not only green sourcing, It is responsible sourcing that we are talking about. And that actually starts triggering your value chain, your supply chain in terms of waking up, in terms of what is the demand, what is the your client needing. And corporates need that for themselves to declare it to their customers in terms of how responsibly they are driving the business. So focus on embodied ecological footprint, on where you are sourcing, and all this is business de-risking, mind you. When I talk about sourcing and efficient use of resources, it includes water. And I'll tell you, water is a very, very local kind of a de-risking that you need to do. There are many efficient systems today we have, and I think we have best of the technologies. The point is on compliance implementation. And today, in fact, water is a lot of regulated commodity, I would say, for industries at least. All this that we need to do to bring in efficiency is part of the regulations. The whole point is how much are those regulations implemented, and how much, to what extent are authorities really taking it seriously to implement. But going beyond that, as corporates who are more responsible, I think it is managing the resource and trying to move more towards resources which are not going to be taking from the community, but rather mitigating the impact of what you are actually withdrawing. And by that, I would say the more of a recycling, bringing in efficiencies, and overall looking at your embodied footprint because of the resource use is going to be the next focus, rather than, just looking at the operational indicators and bringing in efficiencies and offsetting for those indicators.
Thanks, Tejasri. So what I learned, at least, and maybe I'll summarize and Tejasri correct if I'm wrong, is that beyond looking inwardly into your own processes and consumptions as an organization, focus is going more and more towards the pre-production, pre-consumption stage, which is the supply chain. And again, on the post-consumption, post-production stage, again, India has taken a lead with having EPR and other regulations where with the extended producer responsibility kind of issues which we have in the country. And I encourage all of you to read and learn about it, and I'm sure we'll cover it in the course as well. There is the pre, the during, and the post, and a lot of good intentions, good regulations, and I'm glad that businesses are also looking at it from a holistic point of view. Let's come back to Ashish and bring the focus back to S. So, Ashish, my point to you is that when you've been working and you've mentioned that it's moved from sustainability to S, and again, within S, what I have seen, maybe I'm wrong, is a lot of focus just goes towards the D, which is the diversity, but there's always the equity and the inclusion and other aspects as well. So what's your experience with corporate India on the S side, and how is this holistic DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion process moving there?
Well, you're right. When we talk about S, there have been some topics within the S umbrella which have been traditionally focused upon for a very long time. Health and safety, for an example. All corporates have been focusing on health and safety for more than few decades. The diversity agenda is just developing, I would say, in the Indian context. It's still not reached a maturity level which we could be proud of. But at least we are making progress. The one, misnomer there is that diversity is all about gender. It's not. It quite evidently is not just about gender. And even within gender, it cannot be, one-dimensional. So someone saying just because we have 40% women doesn't mean they have a good diversity index, right? I mean, you also need to look at it from the perspective of gender pay gap. You also need to look at it from the perspective of what level of representation do women have in the organization. And thankfully now with the regulation coming in that for listed entities you need to have one board member who is a woman, there's some progress happening in that direction. But having said that, there's so much of dearth of women directors that companies actually struggle to appoint a woman director. And why is that? It's more systemic than anything else. So because traditionally we have not done enough for women to progress in their careers, for women to have the right kinds of opportunities, we don't have women at those leadership positions at all. Like it's a very scarce resource at this stage. Women leaders are a scarce resource. I may actually say that out loud. Uh, so I think while the progress is happening, there's a long road ahead, a long journey ahead, and the approach towards enhancing diversity within an organization also needs to be more equitable and inclusive. It's not just about being diverse. It's not just about bringing on more diverse people to your workforce, but also creating an environment which nurtures them, empowers them, and enables them to stay with the organization longer. Very clearly in the Indian context, there are three key things which always lead to women moving away from the workforce. First, it's marriage. So the moment we have seen women get married, they leave their jobs and then do not come back. Even if they do come back, they come back with a reduced capacity. Second is mobility. So if their family moves, they are forced to move. It doesn't happen the other way around. Like if a woman moves, the husband doesn't move with them, right? And the third one is maternity. So once a woman becomes a mother, most often than not, they leave the workforce. And again, if they come back to the workforce, they will come back with a reduced capacity and do not progress in their careers. Why hasn't corporate fixed these problems is a question that needs to be answered by all of us. You have to create systems which help women address these life-changing events. And that is what will enhance diversity in any organization. It's not just about appointing women. Now, this was on the DE and I part of S. I would be probably so bold as to say that's about it that we care in terms of the social agenda. We don't care as corporates about most of the other social topics like human rights. At this stage, there is very little focus that we have given to human rights as a subject. And most of the times when we have this discussion, one of the excuses that corporates give is that it's compliance driven. Now the regulator has told us that this is what human rights means for you, and we are compliant, we are doing nothing wrong. I'm sure when you go down to the ground and see, you would find that even compliance is an issue. But the point is that you have to go beyond compliance. It's not just about what the government tells you to do. It's about what is right. That is what you have to do. So I think Indian corporates need to go beyond the compliance mindset and look at human rights as a more holistic subject as well. And the supply chain angle to human rights is the most pertinent one. Mostly we have seen that in the permanent workforce, it's relatively or reasonably well managed. But when it comes to contracted workforce, there are always lacuna, there is always mismanagement, and that leads to many such cases which are there for human rights violations. I would also say one more key issue here that has created this challenge is the perception that social issues are intangible. I mean, how many times you would have heard people saying that social issues are intangible? Why are they intangible? Just because you do not express them in terms of INR or dollars? Is that why it's intangible? I would completely disagree with that. Yes, I know they have not been represented in terms of monetary values, but how can the strife or well-being of a person be intangible? It's as tangible as it gets. So it's about time now we come up with those methods, those metrics to actually measure effectively the social impact of any activity. And believe me, it's very much possible. We actually did this exercise in 2013. It was called the true value of a business. And it was such a unique exercise that we did with one of the leading cement companies in India. That was the first pilot project we did. And the way we went about it, we were, amazed at the kind of outcome that we came up with, and how it impacted the perception of the management of the company. Because so far, again, the same perception was there that social issues are intangible, and that's why we don't set targets around it. Once we presented our outcomes to them, they were amazed by it, and then they had all sorts of targets around social impact indicators, and now the company has been doing very, very, very well on that. So I think going forward, we need to move away from this notion that social impact is intangible. We need to have more robust data around social impact indicators, and all of us have a role to play in that. When we go back to our organizations, we should make sure that we put in place those indicators and start measuring the social data, because that's how, going forward, it will be available for people to make decisions, and it will lead to the right kinds of results. So with that, I'll just give it back to.
Thanks, Ashish, to bring us to a very human and heartwarming kind of a note. I don't know how much time we have, but we'll quickly go around the room. We do have very good, eminent panelists, so I encourage all of you to ask any questions, thoughts that you may want to share, or any further clarifications you want from these.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, you're allowed.
So I heard a lot about regulations coming into place from towards the corporate and regulators questioning and everything. My question is a little different here. It's like, how many of the corporates are going back and questioning the regulators or the government in the practices they are doing? When can corporate India reach there? I'm coming from a very different viewpoint, because I don't come from the industry where you all. I come from more from a wildlife and environment side of it, and now you've been an environment person yourself. Everyone knows what's happening in Andaman and Nicobar Islands off late. And unfortunately or fortunately, the environment minister goes to say that we'll move the ecosystem from there to a place in central India. And he has no idea about what's going to happen with the endemic species over there. Is anybody questioning that? Does that, I know it may not come under the purview of this, but why I'm questioning this is, why can't we have a robust corporate India which can go back and question the policies and the policy makers in what they are doing?
So I would not say questioning, but I would say there is consultation, which does happen. Lately, we have seen a lot more consultation happening with the government, and as an industry, we are actually part of one of the industry platforms which is looking at mainstreaming biodiversity in business decisions. So, because you come from a wildlife background, I thought it was worth mentioning here. What now the companies are moving beyond very known environmental indicators of use of energy, use of water, how much waste you are generating, or impacts on this. We're going more beyond in terms of what is not directly seen probably to many of the organizations, unless it is an extractive business, is what is your indirect impact on ecosystem services and biodiversity. And we have a platform under Confederation of Indian Industries, which is India Business and Biodiversity Initiative. And as part of that platform, these kind of issues, or where there is a conflict with the policy, or there is suggestions for policy creation, there is very active dialogue with Ministry of Environment and Forest. I would not say that everything translates or gets back into action, and it's a long journey. Probably we need to keep doing it. But the positive side of it is they are ready to listen. They have very frequent kind of meetings and interactions. A lot of inputs goes from industries as well in terms of formulating. Again, not necessarily they will come out, what you really want. It is they also probably have many other stakeholders talking to them, and most of the times industry don't like what comes out as a regulation. But having said that, I think it is bit for a larger good. There are a lot of gaps. The understanding is also evolving with the authorities, I would say that. And many of the learnings do go from corporate India in terms of what they have faced. And again, I think this is something which is just beginning, but it's heartening that now industries are looking at that impact on the whole biodiversity part of, their sourcing, their decisions on sourcing, their entire supply chain impact or the product impact on biodiversity. And I think that's where the whole environment space needs to move. Then there's very visible indicators of water waste and energy that you're talking about as part of your whole decision making process. So I can just say so much at this moment.
I would just add to it. I think ecosystem services and biodiversity is a lesser understood space in corporate India today. So I have dealt with a lot of ESG rating providers. Believe me, biodiversity section is the least populated there, because there is not much understanding of what is the impact. So there's this concept of double materiality, how you impact in environmental metrics and how that environmental factor impacts your business. On both sides, there is a lesser understanding. As investors also, we are also at fault because we also don't give a lot of stress on biodiversity impacts today. NGOs, so for a longest time, biodiversity was a part of the CSR initiatives. So you will add one biodiversity related initiative into your 2% program, and that is reported in a very good manner in your sustainability report. But that's an actual area. We have not seen a lot of corporates actually doing a lot of work on biodiversity because there is a gap in understanding. NGOs do a very good job at it. We have had NGOs writing back to us saying that XYZ initiative has happened under XYZ cost.
As green spaces, the whole concept of what should be there in those green spaces itself is not there. And that's where, in fact, these inputs have gone from industry itself to regulators in terms of, if not, at least specify those local species that companies should have in their green spaces, in their manufacturing locations, rather than having some exotic, or invasive species because just they grow faster. Focus on local biodiversity, local indigenous species, so that the entire flora and fauna of that region survives. And this visibility itself, so that understanding itself is not there with smaller companies. And somewhere that's where the regulators can at least give a direction in terms of this is what only should be there. And those inputs have gone. And when I was part of a discussion when this input went to the government in Maharashtra. So they were not aware that, it's mandatorily certain area needs to be green, and that there is no specified norms in terms of what kind of green it should be. So it cannot be green for green, which is actually, just a lawn and which is consuming a lot of water. But it should be more of an indigenous species, which is not going to take you a lot of maintenance, but at the same time support your local biodiversity. It's that small impact, but that's what is within your purview. At least start looking at that. So I think it's beginning.
I think we'll take one last question.
Hi, Indresh here. Just my question to the panel members. It's regarding the clean development, mechanisms, carbon emission trading. So does it fall under the extended definition of greenwashing?
It's a very, very interesting and a valid question. The clean development mechanism, which was an outcome of the Kyoto Protocol, as many of you would know, started off with a right intention, but then fizzled out because, many of the people started utilizing it for the wrong reasons. And the wrong reason being making money out of it. Rather than actually looking at using such opportunities to create the right kind of impact. And we as consultants, we went through that journey as well, where the whole purpose of the CDM mechanism was to enable such projects which would not have seen the light of the day unless they received that aid, right? That was the whole purpose of it. The entire objective turned on itself, and people, just would take any route possible to justify the additionality of those projects, both from a technical additionality perspective as well as commercial additionality perspective. So I think, yes, it did fail because of that reason. Hopefully, in the future carbon markets, these issues will be resolved and we'll see better outcomes. Voluntary carbon markets have been doing really well on that perspective. I think many of these mechanisms, like you have the Vera framework, the VCS, they have been doing reasonably well compared to the CDM framework, and that's why they have succeeded so far. I think India also kind of announced, the Honorable Prime Minister announced that India will have a carbon market very soon, and hopefully we will learn from these mistakes that we did in the past, and it will achieve the outcomes that it is intended to.
I think we have one last question from some folks who are online. So Asha will read that.
So we have 44 people watching, all of you all online also, apart from the ones present. So we got a question from Mr. Kalpesh Patil. Due to multiple regulations and standards being there, one dilemma that organizations face nowadays is which standard to follow. How do you, as an organization, tackle this issue?
So I think we should not get bogged down by the number of frameworks and standards. What we did talk about is defining your journey using the concept of materiality, so that you know what is most important for you as an organization, not just to report upon, but also to define your own strategy and impact. What you will find that while there are a multitude of these standards, frameworks cropping up everywhere, 90% commonality is what you will find across these frameworks. So it's not a kind of a multiplicative thing that if you do 3 frameworks, it's 3 times the efforts. That's not the case. I would rather say you focus on the basics. The basics is that you need to define your ESG journey, which is customized to you and your stakeholders, and focus on that. Everything else will fall into place.
I have one question to all. See, you're talking about Priyanka, like as you said, you're part of the SEBI panel. Yeah, SEBI panel, formulating all these requirements. Like, see, the ESG, what we now call as a 3-letter word, had been there in various forms. Like, for example, the independent director's primary portfolio used to be ESG. The rest of will be followed by the executive directors. And when SEBI enforced that 33% of directors should be independent, and now they have put it to 50, and one independent woman director is must. Not even 17% of corporates have followed that. So we cannot say it's ignorance, right? And when we talk about greenwashing, you still see it's not intentional. And for a corporate which spends millions and dollars of things, and if they don't even understand what is compliance with respect to SEBI, and if they don't enforce it even after 24 months, in fact, they had increased the fine rate 50,000 rupees per day if it is not complied upon. And after that also it went in thin air. Whether they really collected it or not is a different question. Like, I'm not questioning you guys. I'm just like how he's asking the environmental, a politician's question he's asking you guys, like what are you doing about, XYZ, Andaman. See, like, when the society wakes up, I would say in our own era, we saw COVID, which shook up everyone, right? Including the politicians, the corporate, the common man. There was nothing else which shook up everybody so much that, we learned from that. But still, unless another COVID comes in, we're going to forget that story, I really feel that COVID should keep coming continuously. So my question is, what if the ESG is not complied with? What are the repercussions, what are the consequences the corporate will face? So that's going to be the important area, because SEBI has just announced that from 1st April, you're supposed to give your ESG score along with your EBITDA and top line. Okay? Now, I'll tell you very honestly, there it's going to work like hell. All the retail stockholders, they're going to look at the ESG score and they're going to completely change the name of the game. But for non-compliance, nothing will be done. So what's your take on that?
Yeah, so there's this another, I think we've already talked about this on the panel, but I'll just reiterate. ESG compliant is a misnomer. It is totally a misnomer. Compliance is compliance. ESG is beyond compliance. ESG would not exist if it was not, not about going beyond compliance. ESG is what you do consciously to be better than your peers and to add value to the matrices of society, environment, and governance that you're operating within. That's one. The second part is about intentional greenwashing. Not all greenwashing is non-intentional. Some is deliberate also. The point on independent directors, I understand that's one of the examples. There is a responsibility to corporations, but there is also, as investors, we have found that out, there is also a practical difficulty. And that difficulty is that because the onus on independent directors is so much today, as minority investors, I pull my weight on the independent directors because they are responsible. And at times, they are too few, too scared of the promoters to say anything. And in spirit, maybe not even independent because they've been sitting on the board for 10 years, that they're not able to be the voice of minority shareholders. There is so much pressure today on independent directors that people do not want to be independent directors. That's an actual problem we are facing. Having said that, this is a direction where even the investors are trying to pull their weight. I'll quote a very specific example. What SBI Funds Management has started doing is, we have in this year voted against every single company who has not had an independent, 50% independent board, even if by law they are required to have only 33% independence. If they have said that it is already in the works and we are going to make our board independent in compliance to SEBI requirements, then we have taken it in writing from them. This is upon us as a society to make things right. We cannot keep waiting for the corporates to take action. We have to ask the right questions as society members, as media, as people like Harsha who pull up everybody when they are doing something wrong. This is upon a lot of us, and regulator is also conscious of the fact there are practical difficulties. But as an ecosystem, we've come that far that companies today have 50% independence, and this is only going to improve. But then again, as an ecosystem, we need to push towards the right things, the right achievable things. Independent directors only in numbers to satisfy the compliance of LODR, not enough. There should be independent directors who are independent in spirit, who can speak their minds, who can take a position, and who can actually represent the stakeholders, if not only minority shareholders. That's the way we should be moving. Yeah.
I think we'll have tea and coffee breaks, so do grab any of us and keep continuing. But right now we'll just wind this up, and I think they want to do the honors.
So this shows that we are in the correct learning mode, as we have taken the class beyond the coffee break. So again, like a good student, I'll request everyone to be back at 1155, so that 5 minutes before we are here and we start our discussion better.